I was standing at my kitchen counter, pouring the last of the morning coffee into a chipped mug I'd owned for 20 years, when I opened the envelope that had been sitting in the pile of mail since yesterday. I thought it was just another reminder from the credit card company, something about a low balance offer or a survey. But the moment my eyes caught the number at the bottom of the page, I nearly dropped the cup. $23,640. For a second, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I rubbed them, blinked hard, and looked again. The list of charges stared back, neat and cold, each line item sharper than a knife. Cedar Hill Events Center, $9,450. Rose and Lantern Floral, $4,280. Blue Harbor Catering, $7,910, and more. I traced my finger down the column, and with every number, something inside me cracked. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. This wasn't just money. This was my emergency card, the one I'd given Emily 2 years back. I had said the words carefully, looking her in the eye at my kitchen table, the same table where I was now. Only if it's truly necessary, honey. Only if there's no other way. She had nodded, promised me she understood. And now here it was, proof that my daughter had used it not for survival, not for a crisis, but for a wedding. A wedding I had been left out of. The kitchen was quiet, except for the old fridge humming in the corner. Outside, spring sunlight lay across the grass in soft patches, but it felt like winter had crept into my chest. I sank into a chair and let the paper tremble in my hands. I had imagined Emily's wedding countless times. In those daydreams, I was walking her down the aisle, my arms steady, her smile nervous but radiant. Maybe there would be soft music from the church piano, maybe a little potluck after with friends from the congregation bringing pies. I thought I'd get to give a toast about her growing up too fast, about how proud I was. But now, reading this statement, it hit me. She didn't just forget me, she had deliberately erased me. I could almost hear her voice in my head, bright, dismissive, telling someone at the florist that her father wasn't involved. I could see Daniel, my son, probably standing by her side, shaking his head at the thought of me being there. And Michael, her fiancé, with that polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. I sat there for a long while, listening to the tick of the wall clock. My neighbors were mowing their lawns, the sound drifting in through the open window. The smell of fresh-cut grass should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the world was moving forward without me. I thought about picking up the phone right then, dialing Emily's number, demanding an explanation. My blood boiled hot enough that I could have shouted across town, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way my hands shook too badly to dial. Maybe it was something deeper, a bone-deep exhaustion of being treated like I didn't matter. I had been quiet for too long. Too many years of swallowing disrespect, telling myself family would come around. When my wife passed, I thought the kids and I would hold each other tighter. Instead, little by little, they pulled away. I'd been patient, forgiving, but this was theft. This was betrayal. I folded the statement carefully, almost tenderly, as if it were a letter from a stranger that had delivered a cruel truth. Then, I set it back on the table. My coffee had gone cold, but I lifted it anyway, letting the bitter taste sit heavy on my tongue. The words came to me slowly, steady as a church bell. If they think I'll just sit here, they're wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street lamps glow and fade, listening to the creak of my old house. I thought about how Emily had come to me last Thanksgiving, her cheeks pink from the cold, asking if she could borrow the card for emergencies. She had touched my hand, said she worried about unexpected bills. I remembered the pride I'd felt, thinking my little girl still needed me. I never once imagined she'd twist that trust into a way to cut me out of her life. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. It was about being told, silently but unmistakably, you are no longer part of this family's story. The next morning, I walked to the diner on Main Street, the one where folks from church usually gather after Sunday service. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, and the waitress, Martha, poured me a refill without asking. I stared at the menu, but didn't order. Across the room, a young father was helping his daughter stir syrup into her pancakes. She laughed, sticky fingers smearing across his sleeve, and he didn't mind. He just smiled at her like she was the best part of his world. Watching them, something in my chest ached so deeply I thought it might never stop. I pulled the credit card statement out of my pocket, unfolded it again, and laid it flat against the table. The numbers glared up at me under the fluorescent lights. I traced them with my finger until Martha came by and frowned. "You all right, Richard?" I folded the paper quickly, forced a smile. "Just bills," I muttered. But in my mind, I was already making a decision. I would not beg for a place at Emily's wedding. I would not grovel to Daniel or smile politely at Michael while he dismissed me. If they wanted me gone, then they would learn what that cost. I stepped out of the diner into the bright Ohio morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Not despair, not surrender, resolve. I thought back to that night 2 years ago, when I had handed Emily the card across the kitchen table. I remembered the look in her eyes, that promise she'd never break my trust. And now, here I was, holding the proof that she had. I tucked the paper back into my pocket, and as I walked home, I whispered to myself, low and steady, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." I dialed Emily's number 3 times before she finally picked up. My thumb hovered over the phone longer than it should have, my hand trembling as if I was about to call a stranger. When her voice came through, bright and clipped, it made my chest tighten. "Dad, what's going on? You've called me 3 times. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily, I just opened my credit card statement. Do you know what I saw? Over $23,000 in charges. Venue, catering, flowers, all for your wedding. As and are. That owns as." There was a pause on the line. Not long, but long enough for me to hear the faint hum of her car engine. "Dad, I meant to talk to you about that." "Meant to? Emily, you used my emergency card. You swore it would only be for something you couldn't handle, and now I find out it's been used for a wedding I wasn't even invited to help plan?" My voice cracked, despite my effort to sound calm. "Don't make this a big deal," she said, a forced laugh bubbling up, sharp as glass. "We're gonna pay it back. Michael and I talked it over. We'll figure it out." "I'm not worried about the money," I said, my hand pressing against my temple. "I'm worried about what it means, about being cut out of your life." She went quiet. For a moment, I thought maybe my words had sunk in. Then another voice came on the line, one I recognized instantly. Daniel. "Dad, don't start. Emily's under enough stress, as at Island. The wedding's 2 months away, and the last thing she needs is you blowing up about money." "Money?" I nearly choked. "Daniel, this isn't about money. This is about trust, about being erased from my own daughter's life." "Come on," he snapped. "You're making it all about you again. Can't you just let Emily be happy?" The line blurred with static, or maybe it was the blood pounding in my ears. I pulled the phone away and stared at the ceiling as if I might find the right words there. When I brought it back, Emily's voice was quieter. "We'll make it right, Dad. Just, please, don't ruin this for me." Before I could answer, the line went dead. I sat there, the phone heavy in my palm, listening to the silence of my house pressing in. Outside, a dog barked, a lawnmower roared to life, and somewhere across the street, wind chimes clinked lazily in the breeze. The world was moving, but I was pinned to my chair, paralyzed. Later that afternoon, I drove into town. I needed air, needed the noise of people around me to drown out the echo of that call. I stopped by the post office, then wandered past the barber shop where old men sat on vinyl chairs, swapping stories about fishing trips and bad backs. Their laughter spilled onto the sidewalk, warm and familiar, but it only made me feel like an outsider. I pushed open the door to the diner again, the bell jingling overhead. Martha gave me her usual nod, setting a mug on the counter before I even asked. "You look like you've been through it," she said, pouring coffee. I forced a smile. "Family business." "Ah." She didn't press. Folks in this town knew better than to pry too hard. As I stirred in the cream, I caught sight of a couple in the corner booth. Emily and Michael. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. Michael looked the way he always did, perfectly pressed shirt, hair slicked back, every move measured. He caught me watching, his lips curving into a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. I looked down at my cup, heat crawling up my neck. Emily didn't see me at first, and for a fleeting second I thought about walking out before she did. But then she turned, her eyes widening. "Dad," she said, sliding out of the booth. "What are you doing here?" "I live here, Emily," I said, sharper than I intended. "What are you doing here?" Michael stood, offering his hand as if we were strangers. "Mr. Lawson," he said smoothly. "Good to see you." I didn't take his hand. "Likewise." Emily flushed. "Dad, please, don't be rude." "Rude?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Emily, I just found out you borrowed more money than I ever made in a year without telling me, and I'm the one being rude?" People in the diner had turned their heads, trying not to look, but looking anyway. Michael placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, guiding her back toward the booth. "We don't need to make a scene," he said, voice low, smooth as oil. But the scene was already made. Emily sat back down, her face stiff, and Michael leaned in close to whisper something I couldn't hear. She nodded quickly, eyes darting anywhere but at me. I left without finishing my coffee. That night, the house felt colder than usual. I sat in the recliner by the window, staring out at the streetlights flickering. I thought of all the times I'd been there for Emily and Daniel, late nights waiting up after football games, scrimping every dime to buy Emily's prom dress, teaching Daniel how to change the oil in his old car. And now, my role as father had been reduced to a bank account, one they could raid and then discard. Sleep didn't come easy. I replayed that phone call again and again, Daniel's voice sharp, Emily's dismissive tone, Michael's hollow politeness. The betrayal cut deeper with each recollection, carving out something in me I wasn't sure would ever heal. The next Sunday, I went to church. The familiar hymns rose around me, but I couldn't bring myself to sing. Pastor Collins shook my hand after the service, his eyes narrowing with concern. "You doing all right, Richard? Haven't seen you look this worn down since Marlene passed." I gave a half smile. "Just family troubles. Nothing new under the sun." He nodded, squeezing my shoulder. "Remember, forgiveness is strength, not weakness." I wanted to believe him, but as I walked home, his words felt hollow. Forgiveness was fine when the wound was shallow, but when your own children carved you out of their lives with surgical precision, forgiveness felt like surrender. That evening, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Emily, in her cap and gown. Daniel, holding up a fish bigger than his head. Marlene, smiling in the garden. I touched the glass, tracing their faces with my fingertip. And I whispered to the empty room, "I won't let them erase me. Not this time." I didn't storm into Emily's house. I didn't shout across the church parking lot or call Daniel in the middle of the night. I'd done enough talking, and none of it had mattered. Words had become useless currency in my family, spent too often and devalued to the point of nothing. What I needed now was action. Frank was the first person I thought of. He and I had shared a workbench at the factory years back before he went to law school. We weren't the kind of friends who called each other every week, but the bond we'd built through late shifts and bad coffee never dissolved. I drove out to his small office just off Main, the one squeezed between a shoe repair shop and a bail bondsman. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, gray hair combed back, glasses sliding down his nose, but his handshake was firm. "Richard Lawson," he said, motioning me to sit. "Haven't seen you in ages. What brings you in?" I pulled the folded statement from my pocket, laying it on his desk like a confession. He scanned it, his brow tightening. "Your daughter charged all this?" I nodded. "On my emergency card, without asking." Frank leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "That's fraud, plain and simple. Even if she's your daughter, the credit company doesn't see bloodlines. They see unauthorized charges. You want to dispute them?" "I want them gone," I said, my voice steady. "Every deposit, every check to the florist, every catering fee. If I was erased from that wedding, then my money has no place there either." He studied me for a moment. "This isn't just about the cash, is it?" I met his eyes. "Number. It's about respect. About not letting my children treat me like a ghost." Frank nodded slowly. "All right. We can file disputes with the card company. They'll open investigations, pull back the funds. Vendors won't like it, but that's not your problem." A small weight lifted from my chest, not relief exactly, but the sense of finally steering the wheel after drifting too long. Over the next week, I watched the dominoes begin to fall. Cedar Hill Event Center called first, a woman with a tight voice demanding to know why a deposit was being clawed back. I told her calmly that the charges were unauthorized and she'd need to speak to my attorney. Her sigh carried every ounce of irritation, but she couldn't argue. Then came Rose and Lantern Floral, then Blue Harbor Catering. Each call was sharper, more desperate, but each time I repeated the same line: "You'll have to take it up with my lawyer." It wasn't vengeance that fueled me. It was clarity. Every vendor who pulled back meant the picture-perfect wedding Emily and Michael had imagined was shrinking. I could almost see the edges curling, the colors fading. I knew the blowback would come, and it did. One evening as the sun bled orange over the neighborhood, my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was a whip crack. "Do you know what kind of mess you're causing? Emily's been crying all day. Michael's threatening to sue. And you, our own father, are the one pulling the strings." I let him shout, the anger pouring through the line. When he finally paused, I said quietly, "You left me no choice." "No choice?" he barked. "You could have come to us, talked it out." "I tried," I said, each word heavy. "You didn't listen. You told me to let her be happy while she drained me dry. You made it clear my voice didn't matter. So I found another way." Inclusion ratters. There was silence, then the sound of him exhaling hard. "You're going to ruin her wedding. Do you understand that?" I closed my eyes. "No, Daniel. She ruined it the moment she cut me out." He hung up without another word. That night, I sat on the porch, the spring air cool against my face. Fireflies flickered over the yard, and the cicadas droned like some old hymn. I thought about Marlene, about how she would have handled all this. She would have been softer, maybe. She would have urged patience, forgiveness. But she wasn't here. It was just me, and I couldn't bear to let our children believe betrayal had no cost. A few days later, I received an invitation. Or rather, a summons. Emily wanted me at dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. It was at my sister-in-law's house, a modest ranch-style place with lace curtains and a long oak table. Most of the family was there, cousins, uncles, even a few church friends who had no business in the matter. The moment I walked in, I felt the tension coil tight. Emily's eyes were red, Daniel's jaw was set, and Michael sat beside her like a sentinel, his hand gripping hers. "Dad," Emily began, her voice trembling, "why are you doing this to me?" I held her gaze. "Why did you do this to me?" Michael leaned forward, his tone slick. "This isn't the place for accusations. We just want you to stop sabotaging our wedding. If money's the issue, we can work something out." I laughed bitterly. "Money's never been the issue, Michael. It's trust, it's respect, it's the fact that my daughter used me like an ATM and erased me from the most important day of her life." Voices rose around the table, cousins whispering, uncles muttering. Daniel slammed his hand down, rattling the silverware. "You're acting like a child," he snapped. "You're supposed to be the father, the bigger man. Instead, you're destroying everything." The word destroying hung in the air like smoke. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing it. If a wedding falls apart because the truth came out, then maybe it wasn't worth having in the first place." The room went silent. Emily buried her face in her hands. Michael glared daggers, and Daniel stared at me with something between fury and disbelief. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt like a man reclaiming ground that had been stolen from him. I left before dessert, stepping into the cool night. My sister-in-law called after me, but I didn't look back. As I walked to my car, I whispered to the dark, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Daniel showed up at my front door without warning. The knock rattled the glass pane, sharp and impatient. When I opened it, he stood there in his work jacket, fists clenched, jaw tight. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. He pushed past, his boots dragging dirt across my rug. "You're destroying Emily's life," he said, his voice low but loaded with fire. "You're tearing apart her dream. And for what? To prove a point?" I closed the door slowly, steadying myself, before I turned to him. "Her dream was built on a lie, Daniel. On my trust. On money she stole. Don't you dare tell me I'm the one tearing things apart." He spun around, eyes blazing. "She's your daughter. You're supposed to protect her, not humiliate her." "I protected her for 26 years, I said, my words cutting. "I gave her everything I could, even when there wasn't much left to give. And what do I get in return? A bill that tells me I'm nothing but a wallet she can empty." Daniel's mouth opened, then shut. For a moment he looked like the boy I once taught to ride a bike, unsure of his balance, ready to topple. But then he shook his head hard. "You don't understand. She and Michael, they've been under pressure. Michael's family expects a certain kind of wedding. Big, perfect. Emily didn't want to look like she was marrying beneath them." The words hit me like stones. "So I'm beneath them now? Your old man who worked his back raw so you two could have shoes on your feet?" His face flushed. "That's not what I meant." "Maybe not," I said. "But it's what you believe. That is in Meitler's. And wanting." He stood in my living room, staring at the worn recliner, the framed photos, the stack of church bulletins on the coffee table. All of it was familiar, the backdrop of his childhood. Now he looked at it like it belonged to a stranger. "Emily's wedding is happening, Dad," he said finally, voice tight. "With or without your blessing. If you keep this up, you'll lose us for good." I wanted to say I'd already lost them, but the words caught in my throat. I simply nodded toward the door. "Then go, Daniel. Seems like you've already made your choice." He left without another word, the screen door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. When silence returned, it settled heavy. I sat down, the old chair groaning under me, and pressed my hands together. My house had never felt so empty. Over the next week, the loneliness grew thicker. At church, people whispered behind hymnals. Martha at the diner asked careful questions, her brow furrowed as if she'd heard some version of the story already. My neighbors waved less, their smiles cautious, as though siding too openly with me might stain them. One evening, Pastor Collins knocked on my door. I let him in, and he sat at the kitchen table, his Bible resting on his lap. "I've heard things are rough with Emily," he said gently. "And Daniel, folks are worried about you." "One friend." I poured him a cup of coffee, though neither of us touched it. "They used me, Pastor. They cut me out. And when I fought back, they called me a monster." He leaned forward, hands folded. "Richard, I've known you for years. I know your heart, but sometimes forgiveness heals more than justice ever could." I stared at the table, at the faint rings from years of coffee cups. "Forgiveness has its place," I said, my voice rough. "But what they did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences." He didn't argue. He only sighed, patting my shoulder before leaving with a quiet blessing. That night, alone in the stillness, I wrestled with his words. Part of me longed to believe that forgiveness could mend everything. But another part, the part that had seen my daughter's back turned and my son's finger pointed, knew forgiveness alone would make me invisible again. So I made peace with the emptiness. If the path to reclaiming my dignity meant walking alone, then so be it. As I locked up for the night, I whispered to the darkened rooms, "I will not be erased. Not this time." I woke before dawn, the kind of restless morning where sleep simply refused to return. My house was still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old clock above the mantel. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam curling above the mug. My chest still carried the weight of Daniel's words from that night. "You'll lose us for good." Maybe I already had. But as much as that stung, I couldn't let myself be cornered. If Emily and Daniel wanted me erased, they were going to learn that erasing me came with a price. I reached for the phone and called Frank. His voice was gravelly when he answered, like he'd only just woken. "Frank, it's me," I said. "I need you to keep the pressure on. Letters, notices, whatever you can file, file it. They need to understand this isn't going away." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Richard, are you sure you want to escalate this? They're your kids." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "If I don't, they'll never respect me again, and respect is worth more than any dollar on that statement." By midweek, the first letters went out, one to the florist, another to the caterer, and a long one to Cedar Hill Event Center. Frank explained to me over coffee at the diner how each letter carried the weight of legal demand, how vendors would think twice before standing against a client with representation. "They may push back," he warned, "but trust me, they'll cave. They don't want lawsuits, especially not with fraud claims in the air." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. It wasn't long before the ripples reached Emily. One evening, I was sitting on the porch as the streetlights flickered on when her car screeched to a stop out front. She stepped out, her hair disheveled, eyes red. Michael climbed out from the driver's side, his face stone hard. "Dad," Emily's voice cracked as she stormed up the walkway. "What are you doing? The florist canceled everything today. Do you know how humiliating that was?" Michael followed, his tone slick but laced with steel. "This is harassment, Richard. Plain and simple. You're sabotaging your daughter's wedding out of spite." I stood, gripping the railing. "I'm holding you accountable. You don't get to rob me and then waltz down the aisle like nothing happened." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "It's my wedding. Why can't you just let me be happy?" "Because happiness built on betrayal doesn't last," I said quietly. Michael sneered. "You think this is about betrayal? This is about you not knowing your place. You're old, Richard. You're supposed to support your kids, not stand in their way." The words cut, but I refused to flinch. Old doesn't mean useless, and it sure as hell doesn't mean I'll be your doormat. Emily tugged at his arm, trying to pull him back toward the car. "Let's just go, Michael. He won't listen." "You're damn right I won't," I said as they retreated. The next morning, Frank called. "Looks like Cedar Hill Event Center is folding. They want to avoid trouble, so they're canceling outright." "In hysterias of them, heaven finite hysterias of the one, and prodity persic." I closed my eyes, exhaling. Another domino down. Still, I knew this wouldn't be enough. Emily and Michael were stubborn. They'd scramble to patch holes. I needed something that would shake the foundation. That was when I remembered an old friend, Tom Reynolds. He'd retired from the fire department a few years back, but still had friends working inspections. I called him that afternoon, explained the situation. Tom whistled low. "So your daughter tried to cut you out, huh? That's cold." "Now, to one fray." "It's worse than cold," I said. "It's like I don't exist anymore." "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I can't promise anything, but I do know Maplewood Event Center's had some issues. Exits not up to code. Sprinkler system overdue for inspection. If the right eyes look at it, they might have to downsize or even shut sections down." My pulse quickened. "That's all I ask, Tom. Just make sure the rules are enforced." A few days later, word spread like wildfire. Maplewood Event Center had been slapped with restrictions, capacity limits cut in half until the fire code violations were fixed. The grand ballroom Emily dreamed of was suddenly off limits. I heard about it first from Martha at the diner. She leaned across the counter, voice hushed. "You hear about Maplewood? Folks saying they can't host big events now. Rumor is some fire inspection went bad." I stirred my coffee slowly, hiding the flicker of satisfaction. "Is that so?" By the weekend, the storm broke. Emily called, her voice ragged. "They reduced our guest list by half. Do you know what that means? People will talk. Everyone will know our wedding's a disaster." "That's not my doing," I lied evenly. "That's the city making sure things are safe." Michael took the phone from her. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you've only made enemies. If you come near that wedding, you'll regret it." "Thanks for watching." His threat hung heavy, but I didn't let it sink. After he hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the photo of Emily on the mantel, her high school graduation smile frozen in time. I felt the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't just about clawing back money anymore. It was about teaching my children, forcing them to face the truth they wanted to bury. That night, I sat down at my desk with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. I began drafting a letter, not legal this time, but personal. A letter Emily would receive on her wedding day. It wouldn't be filled with anger. It would be a reminder. You can't erase a father without paying a price. I wrote the first line, my hand steady. Emily, you made a choice. Today, you'll see the cost. The morning of Emily's wedding came with a gray sky that seemed to hang lower than usual, pressing down on the neighborhood like an old quilt. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, the steam rising faintly against the chill. My suit hung untouched in the closet. There would be no aisle for me to walk her down, no father's toast, no dance, but I had made my peace with that. The only gift I had left to give was the truth, sealed inside the letter folded in my pocket, waiting for the right moment. By late morning, the street was buzzing. Neighbors talked in hushed tones as cars passed, most headed toward Maplewood Event Center. I caught snippets of conversation drifting from the sidewalk. Half the guest list cut, decorations slashed. They say the place barely passed inspection. I said nothing, only sipped my coffee and let the whispers carry. I didn't plan to attend, but I couldn't stay home either. So I drove by the event center, parking far enough away to keep to the shadows. The grand hall Emily had dreamed of was dark, its doors chained shut by order of the fire marshal. Guests shuffled toward a smaller side hall, the one normally used for business luncheons or retirement parties. The space could barely hold 100 people. Suits and dresses brushed uncomfortably close. I could feel the humiliation before I even stepped inside. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed at first. The room smelled faintly of wilting carnations and reheated food. The decorations were sparse plastic tablecloths, a few bouquets that looked borrowed from another event. Gone were the towering floral arches and crystal chandeliers Emily had pictured. The band had been replaced by a single speaker piping in music from someone's playlist. Emily stood near the front, her dress beautiful but dimmed by the weight in her eyes. She forced a smile for every guest, but her lips trembled, and I saw her glance often at Michael, as if searching for reassurance. Michael himself looked tense, his jaw stiff as he shook hands, his eyes darting toward the smaller crowd with barely concealed irritation. Daniel spotted me first. He froze, mid-conversation, his face darkening. He strode over, his voice low and sharp. "You don't belong here." I held his gaze. "I'm still her father." His nostrils flared. "You've done enough damage. Leave before you make it worse." I didn't move. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I came to bear witness, to see the day for what it island." He clenched his fists, but before he could answer, the officiant called everyone to take their seats. Daniel shot me one last look, rage, disappointment, maybe both before he returned to his sister's side. The ceremony began. Words were spoken, vows exchanged, but the air was heavy. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering about the missing decor, the thin crowd, the cut menu. Every promise Michael and Emily made echoed against a backdrop of absence, things stripped away, things lost. When it came time for the reception, trays of lukewarm chicken and rice were carried out, a far cry from the lavish dinner Emily had planned. The cake, once meant to tower 3 tiers high, had been reduced to a modest 2-layer with uneven frosting. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked loudly, "Is this all?" The mother hushed him, but the words lingered. I watched Emily's face tighten, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Michael kept a hand on her back, his smile fixed but brittle. I wondered if he blamed me entirely, if he'd remind her of that tonight when the guests were gone. It was then I slipped the letter to the usher, a young man in a too large suit. I told him quietly, "Make sure the bride gets this." After the toast, I stood at the edge of the room as glasses were raised. Michael thanked the guests with forced cheer. Daniel tried to fill the air with jokes that fell flat, and Emily forced laughter that cracked like glass. Then the usher approached her with the envelope. She looked puzzled, then pale, recognizing my handwriting. Slowly, she opened it. Her hands shook as she unfolded the page. The room spun around her, but I only watched her eyes as they moved over the words. "Emily, you made a choice. Today you see the cost. You erased me, but I am still here. Not to destroy you, but to remind you that every action has its weight. One day you'll understand that respect is the foundation of love. Without it, everything collapses. Dad." Tears spilled over her cheeks. She pressed the letter against her chest, her shoulders shaking as the music swelled faintly in the background. Guests looked on, murmuring, some uncomfortable, others moved. Daniel's glare cut across the room, filled with hatred so sharp I could feel it pierce me from where I stood. Michael pulled Emily close, whispering urgently, but she shook her head, her tears falling freely. I slipped out quietly before anyone could stop me. Outside, the sky had begun to break, sunlight streaking through the gray. The muffled sound of celebration still drifted from the building, but it was thin, fragile, like a song played on a broken record. I walked back to my car, the weight in my chest shifting. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel defeated either. I had spoken the truth in the only way left to me. The wedding had gone on, yes, but it was stripped, hollowed, a shadow of what they had envisioned. As I drove home, I pictured Emily holding that letter long after the last guest left, wondering if she could ever undo what had been done. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe. The morning after the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table with another mug of black coffee, listening to the tick of the clock. My house smelled faintly of last night's rain, the air damp and cool. I imagined Emily waking in some honeymoon suite that already felt less like a beginning and more like a burden. I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. By early afternoon, word traveled through town faster than the weather forecast. Martha at the diner leaned across the counter, her voice low. Heard the newlyweds had a blow-up last night. Folks staying at the hotel said there was shouting loud enough to rattle the hallway. I didn't ask for details, but they reached me anyway. Michael had lost his temper when the bills were spread out on the table. The deposits pulled, the extra charges, the half-paid vendors, they all stared back at him in black and white. He blamed Emily, called her reckless, accused her of embarrassing him in front of his family. She fought back, saying it was their dream together, that she only wanted to match the expectations his parents had whispered about. By nightfall, the fight spilled beyond the hotel walls. Michael stormed out, and Emily was left sobbing, mascara streaking her dress that hadn't even made it to the cleaners yet. I knew none of this firsthand, but I didn't need to. I'd lived long enough to know how pride and money tear people apart. A few days later, Daniel showed up at my door again, this time looking more worn than angry. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Dad," he said, voice low, "I need to talk." I let him in. We sat in the living room, silence hanging until he finally blurted it out. "I'm in trouble. Not just Emily. Me too. I've been behind on bills for months. Credit cards, medical stuff, you name it. I thought I could handle it, but it's drowning me. And instead of owning up, I pointed the finger at you. Made you the villain so I wouldn't look weak." Hearing him admit it should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It just left me tired. "Daniel," I said, "lying doesn't make the debt disappear. It only adds another." He bowed his head. "I know, I didn't know where else to turn." In the light, I thought of all the years I'd been the safety net, the one who'd fix the broken car, cover the forgotten rent, bail them out of messes they swore they'd never repeat. Maybe they thought I'd keep doing it forever, no questions asked, but time has a way of hardening a man's spine. That same week, I heard from a neighbor that Emily had been calling around town, embarrassed but determined, asking about ways to earn quick cash. She'd taken a part-time shift at a boutique, even offered babysitting for a family from church. For the first time, she was carrying her mistakes instead of dropping them at my doorstep. And then it happened. A small envelope slid under my front door one evening. Inside was a neatly written plan, each line in Emily's careful handwriting. Month by month, she had outlined payments, promising to cover every cent she had charged to my card. At the bottom, she had scrawled a single line, "I'm sorry. This isn't about the wedding anymore. This is about facing what I did." I sat there a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't absolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. Later that night, Daniel called. His voice was steadier than before. "Emily showed me the plan she gave you. She's serious, Dad, and I'm going to help. Michael, he won't. He says it's not his problem, but I can't let her carry it alone. Zadaribber, unclothes." The bitterness in his tone told me he was still angry with Michael, maybe angrier than with me. I lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the old house. For months, I'd felt like I was shouting into a void, unseen and unheard. Now, for the first time, there was a shift. Emily wasn't ready to embrace me, but she wasn't erasing me either. Daniel wasn't cured of his pride, but he'd peeled back the mask far enough to show me the scared boy underneath. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought of the plan written in my daughter's hand. A debt schedule, yes, but more than that, it was a confession, a bridge, a fragile thread stretched across a chasm. Whether it would hold was uncertain, but at least it existed. The diner on Main Street had always been my refuge. Its red vinyl booths, the smell of fried bacon lingering in the air, the bell above the door that jingled whenever someone walked in. It was the kind of place where a man could sit with his thoughts and not feel alone. That morning I sat in my usual corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. When the door creaked open, Emily walked in. For a moment, I thought my eyes were tricking me. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, her face pale, the weight of sleepless nights etched around her eyes. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing to hide the exhaustion. Clutched tightly in her hand was a folder, bent at the corners from being gripped too hard. She spotted me immediately. Her steps faltered, but she made her way over, sliding into the booth across from me. She didn't speak at first, just stared at her hands resting on the folder, as if gathering strength. I cleared my throat softly. Emily. Her lips trembled before she finally pushed the folder toward me. This is the plan I told you about. I opened it, scanning the neat rows of figures she had drawn up. Every month was accounted for how much she'd pay, where the money would come from. There were notes in the margins, extra babysitting shifts, boutique paychecks, trimming grocery costs. It was thorough, painfully thorough. I looked up at her. You wrote this all out yourself? She nodded quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. I had to. I can't undo what I did, Dad. I can't take back that bill or the way I shut you out. But I can take responsibility now. I need you to see that. The diner seemed to fade around us, the clink of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the jukebox in the corner, all of it blurred as I focused on my daughter. I set the folder down gently. Emily, it's not just about the money. In work, as pans. I know, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought if I could just make everything perfect, Michael's family would accept me. I thought cutting you out was easier than facing the truth. I was wrong, and I see that now. Her shoulders shook as she spoke. For the first time in years, I felt she wasn't hiding behind excuses or anger. This was raw, unvarnished honesty. Before I could answer, the bell above the door jingled again. Daniel walked in, his face drawn, his movements weary. When he saw us, he hesitated, then came over slowly, sliding in beside his sister. He avoided my eyes at first, rubbing his palms together nervously. I guess it's my turn to say something. Emily glanced at him and he exhaled sharply. Dad, I owe you an apology too. I've been carrying debts of my own. Credit cards, overdue bills. I was drowning. And instead of admitting it, I threw all the blame on you. It was easier to call you selfish than to admit I was failing. Yes. The words sat heavy between us. Daniel's voice wavered, but his jaw was set. For once, he wasn't the defiant son trying to win an argument. He was a man admitting weakness. I let the silence stretch a little, wanting them both to feel the weight of what they'd said. Then I spoke. Do you understand now why I fought back? Why I couldn't stay quiet? Emily nodded quickly, wiping her cheeks. Yes, you were right. We treated you like a bank account, not a father. And when you stood up, we painted you as the villain. But you weren't time. You were the only one being honest. Daniel finally met my eyes. We should have listened. Instead, we made you the enemy. I'm sorry, Dad. Truly. The words hit deeper than I expected. For months, maybe years, I'd been waiting for them to see me, not just as an obstacle or a wallet, but as a man who still mattered. Hearing their voices tremble with remorse cracked something in me that had been frozen too long. But not everything was healed. Michael's shadow still hung over the table. Emily sniffled. her hands twisting in her lap. "Michael doesn't agree with this. He says the debt isn't his to worry about, that I dug the hole myself. He doesn't want to help." The bitterness in her voice was sharp. I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the crack in her confidence. "That's his choice," I said quietly. "But it shows you something, doesn't it? About who's willing to stand beside you when the ground shakes." Emily bit her lip, her silence speaking louder than words. Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder, and for once, it wasn't condescending or harsh. It was steady, supportive. We sat there for a long time, the three of us, the coffee growing cold between us. For the first time since this storm began, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, not collapsing, but tilting towards something new. Not forgiveness yet, but honesty. Not peace yet, but truth. When Emily finally spoke again, her voice was soft but firm. "Dad, I can't ask you to forget, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove I can be better." I folded the plan carefully, slid it back toward her. "That chance is yours to take, Emily. Just remember, this isn't about numbers on paper. It's about trust. Every payment you make is a step toward earning it back. This is now and shout, in sout." She nodded, tears spilling again, but there was determination in her eyes now. Daniel sat straighter, no longer shrinking into his guilt. The diner felt different as we rose from the booth. The bell jingled above the door as we stepped into the afternoon sun. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it wasn't blocked entirely by bitterness. It had been weeks since that morning in the diner when Emily slid her repayment plan across the table, her hands trembling as if the paper itself carried the weight of her guilt. Weeks since Daniel admitted the truth about his debts, his voice breaking under the burden he had hidden for too long. The cracks had widened between us, but so had the possibility of something else: honesty, maybe even reconciliation. I decided it was time to take a step I had avoided, inviting them back into my home. Not for confrontation this time, but for a meal. A dinner, plain and simple, at the same oak table where they had once done homework, where Marlene had served meatloaf and mashed potatoes on Sunday evenings, where laughter used to float without tension. I wrote the invitations in my own hand. One for Emily and Michael, another for Daniel. No grand gestures, no pleading words, just a simple note. Dinner at my house, Sunday at 6. Come if you're ready to talk. The hours before Sunday dragged. I found myself fussing over things I hadn't cared about in years. I polished the silverware, even though most pieces were mismatched from decades of replacements. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they shone, set out cloth napkins, and baked a loaf of bread that filled the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. At 5:30, my nerves kicked in. I set the roast chicken in the oven, lit the porch light, and sat in the living room listening for the crunch of tires on gravel. Daniel arrived first. He looked worn but tidier than the last time I saw him, as if he wanted to show respect. He carried a bottle of iced tea, the kind I liked, and held it out sheepishly. "Thought you might want this," he said. I took it, nodding. "Thanks, son." Emily and Michael came shortly after. Emily stepped inside slowly, her eyes darting around as if remembering a life she had nearly lost. She carried a pie from the grocery store, still in its plastic container. Michael followed stiffly, his posture rigid, his mouth set in a line of defiance. We sat down at the table, the food steaming between us. At first, conversation was light, safe topics, the weather, small-town gossip, anything to delay the inevitable. But the tension was there, simmering like the gravy pot on the stove. Michael was the first to break it. He stabbed at his chicken, then looked up, his voice sharp. "Let's not pretend everything's fine. Richard, you've humiliated Emily. You've humiliated me. What you did to our wedding was unforgivable." The air froze. Emily winced, her fork clattering against her plate. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. I set my knife down carefully. "Michael, the wedding was built on dishonesty. I didn't humiliate you. I exposed the truth. Therese," his laugh was bitter. "Truth? You sabotaged your own daughter. What kind of father does that?" Before I could reply, Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "A father who was pushed out. That's who. You don't get it, Michael. You weren't there when Emily used Dad's card. You didn't see what it did to him. He had every right to fight back." Michael's eyes narrowed. "So now you're defending him?" Daniel met his glare. "Yes, because I was wrong too. I blame Dad for things that were my fault. I lied to cover my own failures. But at least I can admit it now. Can you?" The room went still. Emily's hands trembled, and tears spilled before she could stop them. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Stop. Both of you. This isn't helping." She turned to me, her face wet, her knees buckling as she slid down beside the chair. "Dad, I am so sorry. For everything, for shutting you out, for using you, for making you feel like you didn't matter. You mattered more than anyone, and I treated you like you were invisible." The sight of her on her knees cut deeper than any insult ever had. I reached down quickly, pulling her back up. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "Emily, I'm not asking for tears. I'm asking for respect. From now on, there will be boundaries. No more taking without asking. No more lies. It's wanting as a 90. Deflick play." She nodded vigorously, clutching my hand as if it were the last rope keeping her from falling. Michael sat stiffly, arms crossed, his face hard. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You all want to act like Richard's some saint. Fine, but don't expect me to grovel." "Then don't," I said calmly. "But understand this. My relationship with Emily and Daniel isn't yours to control. You can choose how you stand, Michael. Just know your choices reveal who you are." "Reeve resting and litters." He didn't answer, but his silence was louder than words. The rest of the dinner carried on, fragile but quieter. Emily sat close, Daniel helped clear the plates, and Michael lingered in the background, still bristling but subdued. For the first time, the house didn't feel entirely empty. As the evening closed, I stepped onto the porch, watching them leave. Emily hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'll do better, Dad." Daniel patted my shoulder, his eyes steady, no longer avoiding mine. Michael walked past without a word, but even that was its own kind of answer. I stood under the porch light long after the car taillights disappeared. The road ahead was far from smooth. But somewhere between the roast chicken and the tears at the table, I had seen a glimmer of hope, a fragile light in the wreckage. The Sunday after that dinner, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, still wrapped in that heavy silence that comes when years of memories live in the walls. I brewed my coffee, the familiar gurgle of the old machine filling the kitchen, and carried my mug out to the porch. The boards creaked beneath my weight, a sound I'd grown used to over the decades, almost like the house itself was stretching its bones with me. I sat in my chair and let the cool morning air wash over me. The church bells downtown rang faintly, carried on the breeze, reminding me of the years I'd walked hand in hand with Marlene to Sunday service. I thought about the potlucks, the laughter, the neighbors stopping by with casseroles when times were rough. And then I thought about the fights, the bills, the betrayals, how far we'd drifted as a family. For so long, I'd told myself that revenge was the only answer. That taking back control of the wedding, canceling the vendors, forcing Emily and Daniel to face the consequences that was my justice. And in a way, it was. It made them stop ignoring me. It forced their eyes open. But sitting there on the porch, watching the sunlight cut through the trees, I realized revenge had only been the opening act. What mattered now wasn't punishment. It was rebuilding dignity. Teaching my children that a father's worth wasn't measured in dollars or how much he tolerated, but in the respect he demanded and gave in return. The memories of the dinner came back, vivid, as though it had just happened. Emily's tears, her voice breaking as she begged for forgiveness. Daniel finally admitting his failings, looking me in the eye without flinching. Even Michael's silence, cold as it was, had spoken volumes. For the first time in years, I had seen my children not as enemies but as flawed, frightened adults trying to find their way. Maybe I had been too harsh, maybe not harsh enough. But one thing was certain. They had begun to see me again. Not a wallet, not an obstacle. Me. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The bells kept tolling, steady and distant. And in that sound, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough to let me breathe. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. I opened my eyes to see Emily standing at the end of the walkway. She wasn't dressed up, just a simple cardigan over jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. But there was something different about her posture. She wasn't rushing in, wasn't shouting. She stood still for a moment, then walked slowly up the path. When she reached the porch, she stopped. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. Then she did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She lifted her hand and knocked gently on the doorframe. That knock, it hit me harder than any speech could. For years, she had walked in as if the house were hers to claim, never pausing to think about boundaries, never asking if she was welcome. That knock was her way of saying, "I see you now. I respect your space." I rose slowly from my chair, my heart thick in my chest. I walked to the door, hand on the knob. She looked at me, her eyes shining but steady, and I felt the years between us collapse in that one glance. I smiled, not a smile of triumph, not of bitterness, but of acceptance. And then, with a slow and deliberate motion, I opened the door wide. She stepped inside. The house seemed to breathe again. Family wounds often cut deeper than any other, especially when betrayal and money are involved. Richard's journey shows that retaliation may awaken attention, but true healing comes from demanding respect and setting boundaries. His children, blinded by pride and pressure, saw him as a wallet rather than a father until his firm actions forced them to confront their mistakes. Through tears, confessions, and tense dinners, they began to understand that love without respect collapses. The story reminds us that justice in families is not always about courts or laws, but about reclaiming dignity and refusing to be erased. Forgiveness can follow, but only after truth is faced. For parents, it's a call to stand tall, even when love feels conditional. For adult children, it's a warning. One day, the foundation you dismiss may be the very ground you need. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.